Hello, world. It's Noah, film critic extraordinaire. Yeah. What's your favorite scary movie? None of these ones, I bet.
Hello, world! In this episode, I'm going to talk about my top 5 worst horror movies of 2022. What's going to be the worst of the worst? Wait till the end of the video and find out. Let's get to it. Thank you for clicking on my video. You didn't have to do that, but I appreciate that you did. Hello, world! I'm Chris Martin, aka Mr. FLIXTER, and I'm here to talk motion pictures. Mr. Please keep in mind, too, just like those other videos, these aren't necessarily full reviews. These are just my general thoughts and consensus of these movies and why they were so disappointing to me. And that's another thing, too. It's not that these movies are the worst in quality. These are the movies that I was really looking forward to, like the other worst list that I did, and I found myself immensely disappointed. Or they were just bad. Not even so bad they're good, just plain bad. And remember, just like my other two videos ranking the best and the worst movies, this one is also going to be a spoiler talk. You've been warned.
Hello, world. It's Mrs. Whiskers. We're not just warning you about spoilers. We're warning you about these movies, too. Nothing scarier than a promising horror movie that goes horribly wrong. And I'm not a matinee, darling. Hello, world. We're here to spare you from torturous viewing experiences. Honestly, darling, what would you do without me?
At number 5, I have The Invitation. After the death of her mother and having no other known relatives, Evie takes a DNA test and discovers a long-lost cousin she never knew about. After being invited by her newfound family to a lavish wedding in Great Britain, in the countryside, Evie's at first seduced by the aristocratic host. However, she's soon thrust into a nightmare of survival as she uncovers twisted secrets of her family history and the unsettling intentions behind their generosity. I missed my chance of seeing this in theaters, but after watching it on video on demand, I was glad I didn't go. The watered-down wannabe Dracula story doesn't fully commit to what it is, and the big twist is actually revealed in the previews. Why do they do that? There's no suspense, and it overly relies on jump scares that can be seen from a mile away. This is a great example of how a PG-13 rating can severely hurt a film. It's not just about the gore. It's about pushing the sexual tone and language used. Some humor also would have helped, because this movie takes itself far too seriously. And I can't stress enough, there's way, way, way too many jump scares. So some of them are just outright laughable. So those are some of the reasons why The Invitation is number 5 on my list. My grade for The Invitation is a small popcorn.
So, if somebody gives you an invitation to see this movie, you can tell them to fuzz off. You can fuzz off too, Furball.
Oh, I see what you did there. Very clever. Hey, wait a minute.
At number 4, I have the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake. Or is it a sequel? Or is it a requel? I don't know. Did you remember that there was a Texas Chainsaw Massacre released in 2022 on Netflix? Neither does anybody else. So, a fresh-faced young cast who want to revitalize a deserted Texas town go up against the most infamous serial killer in those parts. Leatherface. This movie starts off incredibly slow. It's full of bad acting and all the actors have no chemistry. There's no tension and there's no suspense. The only thing that I liked about this movie was that bus scene. Because it's the first time that I think in the franchise history that there's actually a Texas Chainsaw Massacre in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Who would have thought? Aside from that though, the kills aren't all that creative. And why bring back Sally only to unceremoniously kill her off like that? And how are you going to rip off Halloween 2018? I think somebody working on this movie saw that movie and said, hey, we got to bring back Sally. But if you can't bring back the original actress, which they couldn't because she has passed away, then don't bother because the nostalgia is not even there. It's like what they're doing with Scream 6. If you can't have Neve Campbell, then just don't have Sydney in it at all. That was a very wise choice, and too bad they didn't do that too. So immediately when you see the showdown between Leatherface and Sally, it loses all meaning because there's no history there. There's no nostalgia. It's just some girl cast as Sally, and then she's not even in the movie that long to even make an impact on it. So what was the point of that? Way too many subplots, and there's way too many characters. So Leatherface makeup looks pretty good, and that's what kind of saves it. But what was the whole thing with Leatherface's mom? What about the rest of his family? I mean, he had brothers, he had a father, he had uncles, he had a huge family. And there's no mention of it. It's just him and his mom. And as soon as his mom dies, he loses it? WTF? Those are just some of the problems I have with Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake. Or requel. Or sequel. Or reboot. It's so hard to keep track of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies at this point that you can just call it whatever you want to call it. Whatever. My grade for Texas Chainsaw Massacre is small popcorn.
Leatherface is such a horror icon. It's a shame this film doesn't live up to his legacy. He must be hiding his face in this film because he's embarrassed to be in it.
Oh boy, they sure did massacre this Texas Chainsaw flick.
Yeah, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre can be described in 3 words: cumbersome, convoluted, calamity.
At number 3, I have the A24 film, Men. Oh my god. What the hell did I even watch? After all this time, I still don't know. Do you? It's a serious question. I have a love-hate relationship when it comes to A24. I'm still not sure what I watched. Talk about a head-scratcher. In a bad way. The slow burn story, heavily relying on bizarre images and music, is just, well, bizarre. I did like the use of colors and light and shadows. It does do a good job of building tension, but it doesn't try answering any of the questions that it proposes. If you're going to have an open-ended ending, at least answer some of the questions you proposed previously. A24 is very hit and miss with me. And this time, they missed. I don't even think it's rewatchable. I've only seen it once because I've been dreading having to sit through it again. That says something. I wouldn't recommend this unless you're a hardcore horror fan or love A24. I'm being attacked again. She keeps attacking me.
Feel my wife. Meow.
In the end, it seemed like it was just gory, just for the sake of having more gore. The conclusion is so anticlimactic. This movie sort of reminds me of I'm the Prettiest Thing in the House, or It Comes at Night, because the whole time I felt like it was just waiting for something to happen. But nothing happens! It also reminds me of Midsommar, but it's unfocused and super pretentious. It deals with grief, suicide, loss, and abusive relationships, domestic violence, more specifically. This movie also showed a proclivity for feminism. This movie gets so disjointed and weird just for shock value's sake, and the ending totally kills the film. It's not necessarily scary, it's just unsettling. This movie can be summed up in one word: confusing. Oh, so confusing. What's with all the random, unnecessary body horror? I have so many questions. So, was she talking to the spirit of the forest the whole time? Why do all the men look the same in this little village? Why is it called Men? Why did it cycle through the men and give birth to a bunch of them with a giant gaping vagina at the end? So, is her husband still alive? So, was it suicide or not? Did her boyfriend make a deal with some sort of pagan entity? What was the point of this film? Is it a metaphor for something? Could the theme of toxic masculinity be any more obvious or sloppily written? Seriously, what the hell did I just watch? My official grade for men is a small popcorn with a small drink on the side.
You see, the biggest problem here is the waiting. So, my question is, how many versions of the script did they go through before we got this stinker?
This is a perfect example of how a movie lives or dies with its ending, and this ending just kills it.
At number 2, for the worst horror movies of 2022, I have Morbius. You could say I couldn't be Morbius upset about this movie. I mentioned this previously in the worst of the year so far list in my video with movies and munchies that we did in the summer. But I'll go into a little bit more here what I didn't talk about before, because I've seen this movie a few times since the first time I saw it in theaters, and it's gotten so much worse with each viewing, and I noticed stuff I didn't even notice before, so I'll get into that. But really, after being delayed 2 years, this is what we get. They had all this extra time to work on like the writing and the special effects. Like they could have reshot some scenes. I feel like there's so much more that could have been done here if they would have just tried to make a good movie. Considering the time they had to fix plot holes and the bad CGI, Sony delivered a very disappointing picture. It's disrespectful to the source material. It didn't aggravate me like Batman 2022, but I wouldn't recommend this when there's much better comic book films out there that exist today. I can't help but feel like this was falsely advertised. The previews practically show a whole different film than what was released. They removed all the Spider-Man references and changed countless other things. On top of that, they severely censored all the violence. Like the scene when Morbius kills the soldiers on the ship. It takes away from the fear factor tremendously. Especially since the sound effects are there for blood. You can hear the blood spurting, but there is no gore present in the scene at all because they wanted to make the movie PG-13. If they were able to do an R-rated film like Blade, I feel like this would have gone much better. It wouldn't have felt so watered down. I'm not saying PG-13 films can't be scary, but it's clear the filmmakers were holding back here. I think that's what's the most frustrating part of it all. This film also breaks several of its own rules, multiple times. Does Morbius have control over the bats? If so, why doesn't Milo? Those are just two inconsistencies among many, many problems in the writing. Also, what happened to the third vial? We see Morbius take one, and there's two shown on the table. If Milo took the other one, then the third one is still unaccounted for. Did the writers forget about that one? In the end, when Morbius feeds off Andrea Onjora, sorry if I butchered that, as Dr. Martine Bancroft, it feels contrived because the forced love story between them could have been removed completely and made more time for the friendship between Morbius and Milo. There might have been a better payoff there. You could remove it from the film, and it wouldn't even make a difference. There's no natural development or chemistry for the two of them for a love story. So what could have been the film's heart doesn't feel earned. And it ends so abruptly with no real resolution at 2. It's as if they couldn't decide how to end the movie. I can't help but wonder, what was the point of all this? Worse yet is the end credit scene is so contradictory to the film, as if they couldn't decide what kind of character they wanted Morbius to be. He's the hero of this villain, and now he wants to go evil? WTF? It is so obvious. You could tell Michael Keaton and Jared Leto weren't in the same room. Just the way that it was edited.
Intriguing.
How does he know about Spider-Man? And why is Vulture so nonchalant about traveling through the multiverse? Did no one involved in making this film ask any of these questions? My official grade for Morbius is an extra small popcorn.
So, this action horror movie is just like a vampire. It sucks. Yeah.
And do you know what the worst part of it is, darling? He never said it more in time.
Jared Leto and Matt Smith do their best given the material. It's the script that's the real stake in the heart here.
Before I reveal my number one pick for the worst horror movie of 2022, I just want to discuss a few dishonorable mentions. First is the family-friendly horror pick, Hocus Pocus 2. This is the long-awaited, highly anticipated sequel to the classic from the 90s. It's all about the Sanderson sisters, but this time they take front and center. The plot is hard to follow, with overly complicated connections to the original. It starts off with two teenage girls, and then it goes to the guy that gave them a candle, and focuses on him for a while. And then it goes back to the Sanderson sisters doing random musical numbers and random things. It seems kind of like sketch comedy after a while. They just get in one situation after the next, and it all just seems like a big excuse for Bette Midler to sing. Most of it isn't even thought out very well. You'd think after 2 decades, they would have made something better than this. Seems like it was just so rushed and haphazardly put together. And by the end, the main characters don't even do anything to take down the Sanderson sisters. The Sanderson sisters end up taking themselves down, so it all just seems so anticlimactic, and the main characters just seem kind of pointless because they don't really do anything. The whole story builds up this magical battle between the witches and these little girls, and then that doesn't even happen. It's just so disappointing. The best part of this is Billy Butcherson. I was really hoping to see him again in this one, but it jumps around and has so many unnecessary subplots that he's just kind of pushed to the side. And the third friend of the group just seems so unnecessary. I can't even remember her name. Nah, it doesn't matter. She's absent for most of the film anyway, unless she slows up at the end, completely clueless about what's going on. She has no impact on the plot. So she's no different than the other characters. Even though this movie is streaming on Disney Plus for no additional charge, I still wouldn't recommend it. When you can watch the original, stick with the original. Next, I want to talk about Choose or Die. This movie is obsolete. The writing doesn't do well at showing, let alone telling. Most of the time, I couldn't even tell what was happening or why. Worse yet, it's so boring. Rather than building up a scary mystery to be solved, it just goes from one plot point to the next plot point, and it just kind of feels like it's going through the motions to mark off a checklist. And don't expect a bunch of jump scares or innovative gory kills. The movie's just not very memorable in general. I mean, it starts off strong with the girl in the glass in the diner, but then the games get more and more mild as the movie goes along. Shouldn't it be the other way around? And I felt like the final plot twist was so obvious before it even went into it at the end and it had the big reveal. The explanation for everything was so confusing, convoluted, convenient, and uninspired. It's unclear if the programmer of the game has complete control over the curse involved, or if the curse is acting on its own accord and controlling him. Instead of answering questions, it just raises them. It's similar to Jumanji with the horror spin, and similar to Would You Rather, Saw, and Stay Alive. But I wouldn't recommend it. What the hell was with Asa Butterfield's death scene? And the tape? WTF? This movie's just not worth your time if you have Netflix. There's so much better stuff streaming on there. The next movie I want to mention is Don't Worry, Darling. Think Stepford Wives meets The Matrix, except more derivative, and painstakingly obvious, and mind-numbingly boring. Oh my god, the dialogue in this is just so boring and bad. They could have made it way more philosophical, with existential questions to make the audience ponder. But they don't. Instead, they do nothing. It could have been so much better with a couple of extra rewrites, like some sort of build-up to their arrival at victory. Instead, the story just opens up and they're smack dab in the middle of it all. I hated it so much, I didn't even bother reviewing it after I watched it when it came out. I took some notes, but I didn't even finish my review. I just couldn't think about this movie anymore. Harry Styles and Florence Pugh are the only good thing about it. I didn't like Chris Pine's performance either, as this cult leader guy. So those are just a few reasons why I had to mention this one too. Because it did look interesting at first and I was very intrigued by it. And then it just failed so miserably on so many levels. What was Olivia Wilde thinking? Last movie I want to mention real quick is The Munsters. I think my biggest problem with this Rob Zombie directed flick is the story is so messy, being filled with forced puns and humor. Some of the gags and one-liners work, but for the most part, this movie isn't very funny. And why is it an origin story to the show? And why is it presented in color? The vibrant colors are so distracting. The green lighting is especially heinous. Like seriously, what the hell is that? Where's that light even coming from? What would even make that light in their house? What makes it frustrating is it has parts in black and white briefly, as if to tease you at what it could have been. But the colors are so distracting. Like so distracting. And in the original, Herman Munster usually has a deep voice. The voice this guy uses is so off-putting.
Greetings from Transylvania. That's a strange way of saying hello.
Oh, I guess we're gonna have to get used to it.
And I'm sorry, but Sherry Moon can't act. Rob Zombie's got to stop putting her in his movies. Speaking of Rob Zombie, I would really like to see him direct a movie that he didn't write himself. Because I'm really curious how that would turn out. He's just not very good at writing characters or dialogue or situations or writing at all, in general. Don't get me wrong, he's made some good movies. I do like House of a Thousand Corpses and Devil's Rejects. Those are probably two of my favorites. But aside from that, even in those movies, the dialogue is just atrocious. And the characters are not even likable in any of his films. They're just so trashy and despicable. The costumes are pretty good, though, as well as the impressive set pieces. It does show that a tremendous amount of thought went into the detail about this. But overall, it's just falls short because there's so many missteps along the way. And those are my dishonorable mentions. And now, my number one worst pick for For 2022, Halloween Ends. This movie makes me so mad. This isn't just the worst film in the franchise. This is the worst movie of 2022 by far. Easily the most disappointing. Oh, it's worse than Men. I have so many questions. So little time. Admittedly, I wasn't looking forward to it all that much after I heard all the rumors that you hear on the internet, because they're pretty much unavoidable to a certain point. After seeing it, and all the bold choices that they made, oh man, was this disappointing. Like, soul-crushingly disappointing. This is even worse than Halloween Kills, believe it or not. Did you want to watch a movie about Laurie Strode versus Michael Myers? Then this ain't the film for you. Worse yet, Michael Myers is barely in it. I thought Halloween Kills was bad. This is so much worse. I had the same problem with Rise of Skywalker. Rather than focusing on already established characters and storylines, it focuses on new characters and tries to develop their backstories. Rowan Campbell is Corey Cunningham. He's been accused of murdering a child when he was babysitting. The entire situation, though, just feels so contrived. So, the kid just so happens to be by the banister, while Corey just so happens to kick the door. The kid just so happens to fall into the foyer, as the parents just so happen to come home, and they just so happen to hear Corey threaten his life before it happens. His story arc from there is filled with so many bold... No, not bold. Bizarre. Very bizarre writing choices. He's not even all that believable in the role. And wouldn't he be in jail? Shouldn't he be serving some sort of time? Did I miss something there? Who decided to put him front and center anyways? Aren't trilogies supposed to be planned out all the way through before they get made? How did this even get greenlit? I'd only recommend this for die-hard Halloween fans. This movie is solely for the completionist, though. If you're not a huge Halloween fan, then you're not going to miss anything. Don't bother. It's really not worth your time. It just feels like such a waste of time. The fight's only like 5 minutes, and it's toward the end, between Laurie and Michael Myers. The best parts of this movie is when it plays clips from Halloween 78 and 2018. The kills aren't even all that creative in this one compared to some of the other films in the franchise. Those are just a few reasons why Halloween Ends is my #1 pick for worst horror movie of 2022. My official grade for Halloween Ends is an extra small popcorn with a side of stale candy corn. Also small.
I can't believe my eyes, darling. How did this happen?
This film feels more like a trick than it does a treat, doesn't it?
I have to agree. This movie is so disrespectful to Michael Myers.
And that's my list of the worst horror movies of 2022. Do you agree with my ranking? What are some of the worst horror movies that you thought came from last year? Although it was a really good year for horror, not everything was great. And it's just so fun to talk about. Do you like my hat?
Please like and subscribe. And thanks for watching. Until next time, see ya. Yeah.
I'm Chris Martin, aka Mr. FLIXTER. And I'm here to talk motion pictures. Mr. Did you know that I'm a film critic for HorrorBuzz.com? You can read my reviews on their website, and I make frequent appearances on their YouTube channel, HorrorBuzz Live, so I'll leave links below for that too. You should check it out when you get a chance.